All right, if you go ahead and grab your seats, we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Cornell, Clayton. I'm the director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute here at WSU. And on behalf of the Institute and on behalf of WSU, I want to welcome you out to our debate/town hall meeting tonight with our two candidates for Washington's 9th Legislative District, Representative incumbent Mary Dye, who's on my right, and her Democratic challenger, Jennifer Goulet, who's on my left here. So as many of you know, the Foley Institute was established back in 1995 to honor the service of Thomas S. Foley, who was Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. He served the citizens of Eastern Washington in the 5th Congressional District for over 30 years. And our mission here on campus is to engage young people in careers of public service and to educate the public about important issues in public policy and the operation of our democratic institutions. So it's a great honor for us to be hosting this debate tonight as part of our election series of events. So here's how we're going to proceed this evening. I've asked each of the candidates to give a brief opening statement of about a minute or so, after which I will ask each of them two questions, and I'll give the other candidate a chance to respond. And I might have some follow-up questions as well. And then after that, we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. I will alternate the questions. I'll ask you to ask one of the candidates a question. The other candidate will have a chance to respond, of course. I'm going to ask you to keep your questions extremely short, not to make statements, so we can get as many in as possible. After that, around when we start getting close to 5:30, we'll close off the questions, and each candidate will have a 1-minute closing statement. So before we get to the questions, let me give you a little bit of background about our two candidates. Incumbent Representative Mary Dye is a lifelong resident of Pomeroy, Washington. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Idaho in plant science and crop management. Representative Dye was appointed to the state legislature in May of 2015 and subsequently elected in a special election in November of that year. She currently operates a 3,000-acre wheat farm with her husband in Pomeroy. Her Democratic challenger, Jennifer Goulet, is a resident of Pasco, Washington. She currently works for Hammer Federal Training Center in the Department of Energy at the Hanford site. Ms. Goulet is currently pursuing a degree in applied management from Columbia Basin College, and she also serves on the board of Planned Parenthood of Greater Washington and North Idaho. So we've decided that Representative Dye will be the first opening statement.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the Foley Center for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. I'm Mary Dye, and in Washington State, I see our region is full of opportunities, but I also see that we face big challenges in Olympia. So what will your experiences be here as a student at WSU? And what I see is that you are going to be the heart of the new intellectual properties economy. WSU is the incubator that will be the thing that will start the next generation of the economic growth in this state. And you are the smart people that are going to imagine and innovate the products and services that we will see in the future. You are the ones that you will be building the intellectual properties, the engine of the next wave of progress. You know, wealth and prosperity are not built in a regulatory agency, and unfortunately Olympia has become the culture of no, and I want to change that to a culture of yes. Yes, I'm here to support you, to help you build the tools that you need that will help you become the builders of the next wave of intellectual properties economy. I'm finding very practical ways to move away the obstacles that we've faced to move forward in this state and help you become successful and help our region and our state be successful. I appreciate serving you in the 9th District, and I would appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
So as was already mentioned, I'm on the board of directors of Planned Parenthood, and I'm also the co-founder and president of Tri-City Freethinkers, a nonprofit organization based in the Tri-Cities. And I am also, like, what am I doing again? The Franklin County Democratic first vice chair. And I or to see us hold corporations accountable for the tax breaks and subsidies that they enjoy. We obviously have a big issue coming up in the legislature this time, and we need to fund education. And the way that I think we can do that is by assessing the tax breaks that the corporations are receiving, making sure that they are of value to the citizens of Washington State, and making adjustments where necessary, eliminating ones that are not deserved. And I think that that can go a long way towards funding education. In addition to that, I would like to see, in an ideal world, I would like education, basic education, public education, go through all the way through your bachelor's degree. But in lieu of that, in the meanwhile, I would at least like to explore avenues for making education more affordable so that you aren't graduating burdened with huge debt, often without being able to find really good jobs afterwards, so that you can be participants in the economy. And I also believe in having a living wage, so I don't necessarily assign a number. I believe that the wages should be based on the cost of living in a given area. And I want to make sure that we have climate change addressed and our energy needs met through a mix of all of our resources available, decreasing as quickly as possible on fossil fuels. So if I get elected, I hope that I could represent you in all of those ways and more.
Okay, thank you very much. On several of those issues. My first question is going to go to Representative Dye. Washington currently has an initiative on ballot 732, which proposes to cut greenhouse gases in the state by imposing a tax on carbon emissions. The tax would begin at $15 per metric ton in 2017 and gradually rise to a maximum of $100 per metric ton in the future. The tax is designed to be revenue neutral, so the revenue it generates would be offset by a 1 cent reduction in the state sales tax, an increase in the tax credit for low-income working families, and by eliminating or virtually eliminating Washington's business and occupation tax. So my first question is, if you think climate change is man-made and whether Washington should do anything to address carbon emissions and promote renewable forms of energy, and then specifically, what is your position on I-732?
Okay, well that's a big question, isn't it? Well, first of all, I have to say, as a culture and as a people, Washington State has a lot to be proud of. We're very environmentally aware and very conscientious about protecting the resources where we live. We live in a beautiful state, and I think as we look at the people that live here, we're very, very thoughtful and concerned about protecting the resources and making sure that it is beautiful long into the future. So when you look at the climate change argument and you say, who are the people? I would have to say that Washington State is on the good guys side of the ledger. And so to make more mandates on the people that are the solution, you will only get nominal gains at best. That's my first concern about any proposal on citizens of Washington State. It puts us at a profound disadvantage. And when we are, as a state, very productive, we also are net exporters. We contribute to the balance of trade by the goods and products that we produce here. But not only that, we do so in a very thoughtful and conscientious way. And to make those changes, you wouldn't see the gains and the benefits that's being proposed in a carbon tax. The purpose of the carbon tax is pure redistribution to try and disincentivize certain industries and incentivize new industries. So really what you're doing is picking by a mandate winners and losers in the marketplace. And that's never been a hallmark of the American way. We're not planners. We are people that allow innovation and creativity to grow up from the people who have the ideas, and then we work very hard to do it in an environmentally sustainable way. So this initiative basically is talking about people of color, people in poverty, receiving a benefit at the expense of the industries that create the jobs and the economic prosperity required to support a vibrant and growing economy and lifting people up. So in general, initiatives across the board have unintended consequences. This one in particular has extreme unintended consequences, and it will create a system of winners and losers. And the losers will be all of us who want jobs.
Okay, let me, I want to get Ms. Goulet in on this, but let me just follow up real quickly. So you're against I-732, I understand that. Do you think climate change is man-made, and should Washington do anything about it to address it?
I don't believe that climate change has proven to be a man-made entity, but it hasn't proven that the things that men do have an impact. I know that they are trying to pass a law in Oregon that states clearly that you are only to teach that climate change is man-made and that it's not a theory. But unfortunately, that puts a damper on good quality science. And one of the things that we have here in this institution is the protection of intellectual liberty in science, so that we can be sure that the science that we produce in this institution is non-biased, and that we are reaching for the facts on the matter instead of the political imperative. And so I think it's very important that we keep an open mind and let the facts of the science prove the case, rather than to just buy off on a political agenda too soon into the process.
Okay, Ms. Goulet.
Well, to answer the question about whether it's man-made, absolutely. There's 97% of the world's scientists agree on that. So I think that's pretty much a decided issue, and the question now is how are we going to deal with that? I have struggled with I-732. I have come to the conclusion in the end that I'm going to support it. I think that, Washington State already has one of the lowest carbon footprints in the United States. So in all, I think that what it will do that's really good is Washington State will be set the example for the world. We will be a leader in this, and this is really the only thing that we have right now that has buy-in from both sides of the political spectrum. So it's the most likely we're going to get to do anything to tackle climate change. And I would like to point out that in terms of it benefiting people of color and lower income people, there are progressive organizations that actually have argued the opposite and then have not endorsed I-732 because they believe it will negatively impact those communities. I do think that the impact it has as far as addressing some of the more regressive ways that we get our revenue in this state, that is a benefit that it will provide. And yeah, I have decided after a lot of consideration I will support it, and we've got to do something about climate change now.
Let me just follow up on that, because the Office of Financial Management estimates that the carbon tax and the redistribution that comes afterwards in terms of reducing other taxes will not be revenue neutral. It will cost the state $797 million in the first 6 years. Now, of course, Washington disputes that, but this is the agency we need to look to in terms of fiscal impact. So, what would you do in terms of offsetting that loss of revenue, especially during a time where we're going to have to come up with money for education?
Actually, I can't remember the organization right now, but they said that they did think that it was within 1% of being.
Sightline.
Was it Sightline?
Sightline, yes.
Okay, thank you. So that's something where I think if I get in the legislature, I will have to look at the finer details and figure that out if that does turn out to be the case. Being that it's a voter initiative, we would, I guess, be forced to figure out how we're going to come up with that money. And yeah, the voter initiatives are rarely ever perfect and can have unintended consequences. It's something we'll have to deal with if we get there.
Okay. So my next question goes to you also, Ms. Goulet. It also involves a ballot initiative, Initiative 1433, which would increase the statewide minimum wage, gradually raising it to $13.50 an hour by 2020, and then indexing it to inflation. It also requires businesses to provide employees with family and sick leave. The initiative is backed primarily by unions who argue that it would increase the income of hundreds of thousands of workers in Washington and put $2.5 billion back into local economies. However, it's opposed by business groups, especially small business groups, restaurateurs, and retail groups. They argue that it does not account for different costs of living across the state, and that it would hurt small businesses especially, and would make it harder for young people to find jobs as well. So, my question is, do you support the initiative? And if so, what would you say to small business owners in Eastern Washington who say it is simply unaffordable?
That's another one that, I have decided I support it, even though I think it's not enough. What I do agree with in that statement is that it is not, it should be tied to the cost of living, ideally. Obviously, we can't change the language of the initiative, but if it were not for that, I would say let's have a living wage be our goal, have it based on the cost of living in an area. And I think that for the businesses that are worried, I think that in Seattle we've seen that just hasn't, those fears haven't been true or haven't come to pass. That more money in people's pockets is what drives our economy. It gives them money to go and spend at other businesses, and then those businesses might need to hire more people. And it's a virtuous cycle. And it is phased in over 4 years. I think that businesses will find a way to make it work. They always do. And the job loss doesn't usually, it depends on, with the economy, how the economy is doing at a given time. If you increase the wages when the economy is already moving up, then it does tend to increase jobs. If the economy is already declining, minimum wage doesn't necessarily, or increasing the minimum wage doesn't necessarily increase jobs. So it's more about what the economy is doing at any given time rather than the wage increases. But I do support it, especially the paid sick leave. I don't think it's good for anyone for people to be going to work sick.
So currently, let me just follow up real quick. Currently, the minimum wage in Washington is $9.47 an hour. That's the 8th highest in the country in terms of state minimum wages. What do you think would be a livable wage in Eastern Washington?
Even in Eastern Washington, it depends. I think that the $10 to $12 an hour range, and this isn't based on any kind of study or anything, but just from personal experience and those I know, that 10 to 12 an hour is probably good in most parts of Eastern Washington, maybe not Spokane. And even in Tri-Cities, the cost of living has really been increasing. I definitely think that $13.50 an hour would lift a lot of people out of poverty in Eastern Washington.
Yes. So if you were to start a new coffee kiosk downtown, you could either hire 3 people at $10 an hour or 2 people at $15. So, the idea that minimum wage is going to improve your condition when you as a student oftentimes would love to have some extra income to supplement and have those jobs become fewer just by the mechanics of the costs of production. So let's say if you increased the minimum wage to a certain amount, your wages are based not on the cost of living of the community, they're based on the value that you give to that company. And I think that we become so self-centered in this society and oftentimes in these debates and forget that when you go to work, you're there to serve the greater community, to the entity that you're working at, and that the value that you bring to that entity is rewarded by a wage that is commensurate with what you've produced in society. That's the free market. On the public side of it, public sector doesn't have to produce a product, but so their wages are set by arbitrary means. But raises in minimum wage puts wage compression. So say that you're a skilled worker in a public entity and the minimum wage is then raised to a level that is equal to what you've done in a supervisory position in a public entity. As a matter of course, that public entity would have to readjust their wage scale to match the realities that they are underpricing their management and skilled workers. And so the question is, that makes government more expensive. And those expenses get fed back into the free market economy. So it's basically a double tax on the people that produce goods and services that make the free market economy run. It's a principle that you can't argue with, and it will have ripple effects across the economy. We want to make sure that our kids, this state is one of the lowest employment rates for kids under the age of 18. And these minimum wage jobs are their opportunity to learn important job skills before they have to provide for a family or a home. It's also the opportunity for those kids to move up and achieve some sense of accomplishment. It's opportunities for you when you get to your age and you're at university level, have already moved past that and have the skill sets that are valuable to employers as you move through your career here at WSU and beyond. So the point is that mandating from a top-down government mandate, a regulation, isn't responsive to the realities of individual people's lives. And so in point, this is an initiative, again, with pretty much unintended consequences, and will have a ripple effect that will make fewer jobs available at the prices that beginner workers could justify going into the workplace and getting those vital and important skill sets that they need to be successful in the future. And they will show that if a kid doesn't get a job in those 16, 17, 18-year-old, that will have lifelong impacts over their earning abilities, because those are critical skill sets that kids need to be successful in life.
Let me just follow up. So to be clear, is your argument against any kind of a minimum wage, or do you think the minimum wage right now, as it currently stands, is okay? And how would you respond to the proponents of this initiative, like Nick Hanauer, who's poured, I think, $1 million of his own money into this initiative, who argue that, in fact, this would help small businesses because what's hurting small businesses right now is lack of demand. People don't have enough money to buy products, and if you actually increase their wages, you'll get decreased demand. That helps small businesses. And he points to Seattle, because that happened.
Right.
The economy in Seattle right now.
So my question is, what makes 5 more people go into a hamburger shop because you raise the wages of that person, hourly worker, by $5? These guys don't price the products based on some kind of large margin. They price it to be competitive with all the other people that produce. So there's that already, the supply and demand piece of it. So the point is that you've just increased the cost to run that company. And it doesn't mean that more people are going to just rush in because you're doing a good thing by increasing arbitrarily a wage that doesn't reflect the value that work group is producing. You're going to ask them to produce more with fewer people, because there's only so much that you can absorb in there. So to think that it will increase overall economic growth. What increases economic growth is reducing the burden on the free market so that it can grow and expand in an organic way, and not to just arbitrarily top down say you're going to price this thing based on a government mandate that has no relationship to the value that entity gives to the organization.
So you're opposed to minimum wages in general, minimum wage laws?
We have adapted to the minimum wage we have now. And I think that economies have that ability to make those adaptations. But radical changes, sudden radical changes, cause disruptions in economies that are unsustainable.
Okay, so my next question goes to Representative Dye again. Student loan debt nationally now tops $1.2 trillion. It poses a financial threat to individual students and the nation's economy as a whole. Last year, the Washington legislature reduced the cost of in-state tuition here in Washington. However, the level of state support of higher education is still well below historic norms. In 2007, the annual cost of higher education was approximately $17,000 per FTE student in Washington's public universities. Roughly 2/3 of that cost was paid by the state, while 1/3 was paid by students through their tuition dollars. Today, that cost of education is roughly the same, still around $17,000, but the ratio is the exact opposite. 1/3 is paid by the state, 2/3 is paid by students and their families through tuition. According to College Board, Washington is currently the 11th most expensive state in terms of cost of in-state tuition for its public universities. So my question is, should the cost of tuition be reduced again in the next biennium's budget? And should our goal ultimately be to make higher education free or nearly free for most students, as has been proposed by some of our presidential candidates? And if not, what should be the goal? I.e., what percentage of the cost of public university education should students be expected to bear, and what percent should the state?
Now, I can't answer the percentage piece because I haven't given much thought to that, other than I do believe that the public institutions here are too expensive for students. And the reason I say that is because the inflation of tuition is being driven by a commercial competition between the public institutions and the private institutions. And putting a price point at a certain point lends the perception that there's a point of quality that you're achieving by that price point. And that the students then, they will be competing for students of a certain quality by engaging that price point. The difference, however, is that in the private institutions, they have large foundations that they've built up over long years that offset that cost to most students of middle class needs. And so that the price point to a private institution with a high reputation and a high price point, those kids are getting large scholarships to offset that. And the public institutions have failed to follow suit. And so the actual price that a student pays in a regular WSU education is extremely high in comparison to the competitors in the private market. And I think that we need to have that conversation honestly, and we need to recognize that we're failing to build the type of charitable foundations that would support the students if we believe indeed that this is a first quality institution and deserves to be price pointed the way it is. I also think that, the state contribution to public education has been in question. I didn't realize that it had flip-flopped over the time. I guess I do not support the idea of a free education at the university level because it's kind of a rite of passage, and it gives you the opportunity to I know that in a lot of places people don't believe in the bootstraps anymore, but there's a certain amount of grit and pride that develops when you've achieved a university education and you know that you contributed significantly to that, not only in the work that you do to get the grades, but also in the work that you do to pay for it. And that's a very important skill set. That resiliency skill set is critical if you want to compete in the free market and win. And so I think that we have to keep those structures in place if we want to build the type of people that will retain a free society. And so I think fundamentally, free education through your senior year of university life is probably a bad policy choice.
Okay, Ms. Goulet?
Yes, I do support free education. As I said, I don't know how we could do that in the immediate future because we definitely need to address how we're going to fund our current defined basic education. Ultimately, I would like to see basic education expanded to include pre-K all the way through bachelor's degree, because currently a college education is, the high school diploma of the past. I don't think that going into debt to get an education is building anyone's character, but it is destroying our economy. We have people who are so burdened with the debt that they can't buy homes, they can't buy cars, and that's not the American dream at all. And I think that if we want a free society, that requires economic freedom, and education is so vital to everything in our country. And I think that we have a lot of fields that have shortages as well. So one thing I would like to explore in the immediate future in terms of higher education is in fields where there are shortages, especially in medical care, especially in specialties where there are shortages like in psychiatry and neurology, that we have some financial incentive for students to go into those fields. Kind of like when you have a teacher who gets their student loans forgiven for teaching in low income areas. So something like that. But I definitely think that we need to do everything we can to make education affordable or eventually free.
Okay, so my next question goes to Mr. Lake. Approximately 45% of the state's budget goes to K through 12 public education. Yet the Supreme Court in 2012, in its McCleary decision, said that the state is failing to meet its obligations under the state constitution and currently is holding the state legislature in contempt for not adequately funding public education. The governor and the legislature in the last session came up with an agreement to try to meet the education funding needs for the state, but largely that plan is a promise without any real specifics attached to it. Many argue that already spending on K through 12 has made it impossible for the state to adequately fund other policy imperatives like higher education or transportation in the state. So let me ask you two questions. First is, what do you think about the state Supreme Court's role in this controversy? Is it proper for the courts to force the legislature to increase funding for public education? And then secondly, will we need a tax increase to adequately fund public education in this state? And if so, where would that tax, should that tax be levied? And if not, where should the additional funding come from?
That's 4 questions, not one.
Yeah, I know. They're all related.
Let me know if I forget any of them. For one, I do think that the Supreme Court is within the right. They're interpreting the law, and that is how they interpreted it, is that we're failing to do what we're required to do. And we have to get more revenue from somewhere. I see that we are basically chasing one emergency after another with the limited funds we have. And so yes, we need increased revenue. What I don't want to see is that be taken from people, average everyday citizens. We already have a very regressive tax system in Washington state. I don't want to see that get worse. I think we can avoid an income tax. I know that's a very unpopular thing, and I think it's not necessary. I do think that where we need to look is to these corporations enjoying something like $13.5 billion every year in corporate subsidies and tax breaks. A lot of those are probably well-deserved, and that's fine. But what we don't have is accountability and transparency. We don't have a way to measure what value to society, to Washington state citizens, that these corporations are providing in exchange for the tax breaks. So what I would like to do is implement some mechanism to measure that, and then we can, when they come up, their sunset dates every couple of years, say, okay, what have you done for Washington state? Okay, you didn't do anything, so we're going to remove yours, or you could be doing better, and so we're going to adjust this one. And I think that we could have millions to billions of dollars to put towards education and to other services the state needs to provide.
Thank you. So that was a lot of questions, so you will have to remind me.
So the
on
first one is about, actually I didn't ask you, you did answer the courts. The first is about the courts role. And then
Right,
the
the
second
courts
is about the, do we need a tax increase to fund it?
Right. Okay, so yeah, the court has played a very fascinating role, I think a historic role in the McCleary. The legislature has been on track since 2009 and has met every single target necessary to get McCleary fully funded by 2018. We did that by going through 3 special sessions in the summer of 2015, the longest session ever in the state of Washington. My opinion, as long as the legislature is in session, the state of Washington is at risk. But we did that, and we were able to come up with a compromise. And so now moving forward, as soon as the compromise was concluded, we had the court call the legislature into contempt as a result of the compromise that was signed at the 17th of July in that summer to meet the mandate of McCleary. We have at current, we're funding 48% of the state's budget, is for K-12 education. We included in that K through 3 classroom size expansion. We also added, I guess I would have to say that we added $4.5 billion of additional revenue into the K-12 system, the largest increase in the state's history. So we are on track to meet the mandate. This year, our goal is to find out precisely in every single school district what share of the local property tax is going to meet the basic education needs of that school district. So then we actually have a target to shoot at, and we'll know exactly how much money we need to spend in order to remove that from the local property tax rolls and put it into the general fund in order to fully fund McCleary by 2018. And I'm really confident that we're going to be able to do that within existing resources. We've already seen increasing revenues to the state because of economic growth on the west side of the state, and I think that's very positive. I don't know what the agricultural income this year is how that's going to affect it, because we have had, kind of a real hard downturn in the agricultural sector, and that could be a problem. But in general, I do think that we are on track to meet the mandate of McCleary just purely based on the economic growth. By the time we're done, it will be somewhere in the neighborhoods of $43 billion for K-12 education, and it will be near on 50% of the state's operating revenue will be given to the public school system. Now the question is, can we hold the school system accountable to achieving a quality education, given the funding that we are committing in this state to pay to make sure that our kids get a first-class, world-class education? And that's the piece that I'm hoping that we can achieve as well. So that's it. And then, was there anything else?
No, that's good.
Okay.
So I have some follow-ups, but I'm going to try to get the audience in now. So we have time for some questions from the audience. I'm going to ask you again to direct your question to one of the two candidates. We'll start with a question for Representative Dye, and not to make a statement, just ask a quick question. Yes.
Hi, sorry. My name is Cassie Garrity. I'm a earth science educator at the university. I'm a master's student, and I teach introductory geology, laboratories. And I noticed that you weren't believing in climate change. First, I want to address it's not something you believe or disbelieve. It's not like Santa Claus. This is something that is supported
by... Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I'm just making it clear. This is something that 90.7% of climate scientists agree on. It's supported by many governments and also scientific organizations around the world agree on. And science is you always end with a conclusion. You first have to come up with a question, an open-minded question. Mm-hmm. You then test it, come up with results, and conclude on it. It's not an opinion.
I'm going to ask you to get to your question.
Okay, all right, sorry, it just really bothered me. My question is, instead of speaking for scientists, why can't we have this communication, a healthy communication, or providing research? And we've got a lot of people in legislation saying that, well, I'm not a scientist, but I don't believe in climate change. Why can't we have discussion rather than denial? That's my question.
Okay, right. Well, I'm coming from the fact that I make my living in the climate. So we have long-term forecasters from Clayton University that provide us information every year regarding the Pacific Oscillation Index. And we make our predictions on that based on a rhythm that occurs in the Pacific Ocean. And as that pool of warm water moves back and forth from Japan, the coast of Japan, back to the Hawaiian Islands, it changes our weather on a predictable level every single year.
There's a difference between weather and climate, though.
Right, I know. And what I'm saying is that through that study, it shows that these cycles, whether they're 20-year, we're in the end of a Dalton cycle, whether it's a 50 or 100-year or 1,000-year, they can be documented. And while, yes, we are experiencing a warming trend, it's not the warmest, clearly from the tree ring data. But also, more importantly, when those trends end, they drop off to cold precipitously, something that we aren't taking into account. The question is it man-made and must be regulated? That's where I disagree.
But if
I
you look
do
at the
think that
data,
the regulation,
okay.
the regulation of it, not to offend you, but the regulation
It's not
of
offending
it is not going to gain the benefits that is being proposed by the proposals that we have on the ground. That's where I disagree. We have data, we have
Lots of
science, but we also have the political center of the debate, which is to hurt industries in a certain sector and to create a new infrastructure for government. And that is where I disagree.
Let me get Ms. Goulet on this.
I'm not really sure how to address your question because we're already pretty much in agreement. What I'm disturbed by is the ideology being put in front of reality. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the word theory means from a significant chunk of the population. So, yeah, I hope that our legislature and our national Congress will come under the control of more rational people who will listen to the science and understand that this is man-made, that we have to deal with it. And if we don't, none of those industries in the future will exist. The planet won't be habitable in a comfortable way, if at all, for generations to come. I don't know what else to say about that. I'm always baffled to hear the denial.
Okay, so question for Ms. Goulet? Larry?
So Washington voters this fall have the opportunity to vote on Initiative 1491, which is a focused gun control and the ability to restrict access to guns for certain people. So I have two questions. One, are you supportive of the initiative? And second, what are your thoughts on gun control generally?
That's another one of those ones where I've had a really difficult time. And as of now, earlier I was looking at my ballot and thinking, okay, I still need to know more about this because I believe very strongly in civil rights and due process. And I know that even the ACLU has come out against this initiative. I think that while we do need to do something to address things like domestic violence and whatnot, and it seems reasonable to take guns from people who are making violent threats or things like that, I'm just really uncomfortable with the infringement of civil rights and violating due process. And in gun control issues in general, I pretty much lean the same way. I do think that we have problems that we need to deal with. I would like to see more universal background checks. For example, one thing that I was kind of appalled at earlier this year was the sit-in in Congress over the no-fly. They wanted to take guns from people who are on the no-fly list. Well, the problem I have with that is that people have ended up on the no-fly list, often without knowing why and having no recourse to get off of it. So that is a violation of due process. And I think that if we want to bring down gun crimes or violent crime in general, or all crime, that we need to deal with the social and economic issues that underlie that. And that's why I'm a big proponent of lifting people out of poverty, having adequate mental health systems in place, things like that, because I think that will be the most effective way to address violence and crime.
So did I hear you say you were against the initiative?
Like I said, I was looking at my ballot today and I thought, okay, I want to read the ACLU's statement about this. And it's one of those ones where I'm still undecided, leaning towards voting against it. But
Because I just want to follow up,
sure.
because the initiative does provide for due process in the sense that you have to go to a court and the judge has to issue a protective order where it takes somebody's gun.
I want to look into more of arguments from both sides on that.
Representative,
You bet.
you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. This is a policy piece that isn't ready for prime time. And what happens in initiatives is you have a group that wants to accomplish an objective, but it doesn't go through the representative government. And when you have a piece of law, a policy idea, and it goes through your representative government, legislators from all sides of the political aisle and political spectrum will evaluate that policy piece, and it ends up getting a lot of rough edges knocked off of it before it becomes law. And you know, you're better off to not pass a law than to pass a bad one. And so the initiative process itself then becomes problematic because there's no good process to knock off the rough edges before it's got the force of law, and then we have to deal with the unintended consequences. I think that, you know, in this case, being thoughtful about it and really evaluating, is this the actual policy piece to get the job done? Just because we recognize a problem doesn't mean that is the correct solution for the problem. And in terms of gun control in general, as the question was asked, I believe that I'm a traditionalist. I'm conservative in that I believe in protecting the traditions that have created our nation. I think we're the greatest nation on earth, and we have these protections that were put in by our founders. And so having a Second Amendment right for a weapon is a constitutional right that the founders thought it to be very important to include in writing and codified in our Constitution. And I never want to go against those constitutional rights. I want to protect them at all costs.
So let me just follow, because I understand you're against the initiative, this particular initiative. Are you against the idea that a judge should be allowed to issue an order to remove somebody who's got to be, if at some point they determine this individual is right?
You know, I believe that there are already pieces in legislation that have limits. You know, mental health law that already is on the books states that certain people with mental illness cannot have a weapon. And I know that, you know, those are pieces that individually, if you were to take the policy piece apart, I think you could probably craft some sideboards regarding mental illness and people with issues. But in general, I really think we need to be extremely conscientious about protecting the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens.
So we have time for at least one more question in the back there.
Yes, my question is for Mrs. Dye. The Lewiston Morning Tribune recently reported that you had requested from our sitting congresswoman to look into armed snipers overlooking the Snake River dams. Could you please explain how you got that information and why you put that out?
Okay, so this was something that I was bringing a question from a constituent, and the constituent didn't have good information. And so when it became apparent to me that the reporter wanted to cover this story, as you saw it in the Tribune, I asked him to fact check it with the constituent, because clearly I wasn't real certain that after having brought it to the congresswoman about what was going on. And he did. He checked it with the constituent and others. And before the article was written, we realized that, you know, the facts that the constituent had given me weren't accurate, and it wasn't from a credible source. And so I encouraged the reporter at that time to reconsider because of the implications. And of course, you know, once you asked a question, you have to wear it in the public sphere. It's a learning experience for me to not consider the situational awareness that the media might see it differently. And the constituent that gave the information felt really badly. He also retracted that the information was just speculation. And so a speculation, a misunderstanding, became a major news story, and it was really inadvertent to have it be published that way. I think that we all bear responsibility when you're in public office to be sure that you're aware of how your questions might be perceived. If you're bringing a question from a constituent, you have to be very careful and be sure that you know that those are facts, and it obviously wasn't. I was hoping that having good relationships with people that are writing stories, that we could really, you know, communicate before the stories went out and hurt our communities. And so from here on out, of course, I've learned a hard lesson, and we'll be very careful in the future in front of the media.
How this is for your guy.
Sorry, no, wait.
Mr. Wade.
comment?
The only thing I would like to say is I was very shocked and disappointed to hear, though, that based on the inaccurate information and the speculation, the statement in the paper about calling the Pullman Mosque the most dangerous mosque in America. That's where I was just absolutely floored. Because we already have enough fear and hatred going on in America right now that the last thing we need is someone saying something so incendiary, painting a target on the backs of already vulnerable citizens. And words have consequences, and people need to be held accountable for those. We have words being said about Planned Parenthood all around the country that have led to murders of physicians and innocent people in clinics and bombings, including right here in Pullman, where your Planned Parenthood clinic was attacked by arson. So I hope that, that at some point the political rhetoric will stop, because words have consequences, sometimes fatal ones, and it's scary times.
Can we get another student?
I had a question on education. And this can go to both candidates. What will the state's role be in sex education? More specifically, will we start incorporating different sexual orientations and transgender identities into our curriculum? And to expand on that, will we be doing a better job of teaching mental health curriculum in our schools in the future?
Yeah, I would love to take that, yeah. I very much want to see comprehensive and scientifically sound sex education taught in every school. And I want to see a complete elimination of abstinence only, other than perhaps mentioning it is a choice too. And I would love to see, and I think it's very important that we have inclusion of discussions of sexual orientation and identity, and definitely mental health. I actually posted something to my daughter's Facebook page this week about it would be great to have classes where they discuss mental health, and that way kids feel comfortable with speaking to someone when they have some issues going on. So yes, to all of those things, I would like to see that happen here in the state.
So after the session concluded, the OSPI did release their guidance on K-12 curriculum regarding teaching different issues regarding transgender and things. So, you know, I guess I'm a very traditional person in that I really hope that we recognize that families are unique and have the right and privilege of raising their kids according to their traditions and cultures. And we have a very diverse society with people with all kinds of diverse views. And I think it is the role of the family and the right of the family to acculturate their children according to the traditions of their family. And to jump in and have a uniform curriculum that questions those traditions is problematic for many people. People of minority religions that have come here that would be troubled if we have a uniform policy as proposed by Ms. Goulet and as proposed by the OSPI. And so I hope that as we focus on the reforms in the Clary, that we focus on the customer being the family, that we serve the family in the educational system, and that as a goal for the system, that we want to delight our customers and have a system that really meets the needs of the communities and families that these schools serve and is respectful of the traditions and the cultures that it serves across the board, and that we don't try to inculcate a different type of ethic in the school system. If we stick to the basics, the definitions of basic education, I think that we can have variety of belief and diversity of opinion across our nation, which is the hallmark.
Can I add one more thing, not necessarily to rebut that, but because there's one other thing that I think is important that we add into the curriculum, and that is discussions of consent and bodily autonomy. So I just wanted to put that out there, that is very important also for both male and female children.
Okay, one last question.
Actually, this could be to both of you to serve these things. How would you improve, enhance, or disband the John Wayne Trail? Because, like, around Rock Lake, there's no place to park horse trail, except in the farmer's front yard, which you probably can, but you can't always do that. And part of it, you may not even be able to access it, except by crawling across rocks to get up on the trail itself.
Right.
How would you improve the access to that for people and others?
Right. So on the John Wayne Trail, of course, you know that we've gone through a year-long process, and in the hearing in August, you know, the parks has submitted their conclusion that they want to go ahead and complete the trail from, you know, Beverly Bridge across to the state line. And what the reality is that we have the McCleary elephant in the room this year. And so in working with parks, I really encourage them to work with the communities that are especially interested in developing their portion of the trail. Clearly Rock Lake, Malden area, Roselia, and Tico are very enthusiastic about getting portions of the trail in their neighborhood for economic development. And so I'm hoping that the parks will look at the trail and try and work at it incrementally instead of making an all or nothing ask, because this year it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to lift that entire ask. And what they're proposing is a trailhead with water and restroom facilities and parking and camping. And so all of those things become expensive. The other ask for them is to improve the surface. And then you have I don't think that the working group has concluded what surface. Obviously the horse people would like to have a footing appropriate for horses, and the bicycle people probably would prefer to have a little pavement. And so those are questions I think moving forward that we need to bring to the park department when they present their budget to see what specifically they're looking for. But I know that as of yet, you know, my ask to them was to try and select areas of, like, put it in a priority list instead of trying to do the whole thing.
Well, I can't answer your very specific question because I don't know, exactly how the trail needs to be fixed, but I do support improving it and maintaining it as for public use.
Okay, so we now will move to our closing statements.
Thank you. Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. You know, as young people, as a young person, you've been planning and studying and working to prepare for your future. And this is the year that you have a very clear choice politically, you know. And there are politicians that are defining you, and they're making laws to limit what you might become. They see you as a demographic group, the millennials, and they've attributed superficial attributes, and they put concrete limits onto your future. And they're building narratives around your life that you may or may not be able to escape. Are you going to let these people define who you are and place limits on what you might become? I say no. I have more faith in you and your future ahead. I believe you will claim your right to define your life's destiny, to embrace your life and the risks and rewards of this great miracle called America, and to embrace the freedoms that it offers. You are more than up to the challenge. I know that you will be flinging off those narratives that the politicians of this generation have placed on your generation. And as your state representative, I'm building piece by piece the restoration of the infrastructure to bring liberty back to your life. And that's what I'm doing. And I'm bringing that liberty in law.
Ms. Goulet.
I think that we have, as humans and as Americans, an obligation to take care of each other, and that it's economically sensible thing to do. When each of us is doing better, we all do better. And so I hope that Eastern Washington will elect someone to this office that wants to have us all do better. And I would like to make sure that everyone has the economic opportunity to buy a home and to finish your education and to do all of the things of the American dream and not be constantly drained while a few people at the top enjoy all of the benefits of being an American. And that's really all I have to say. If you want someone who cares about you individually, someone who is going to be a critical thinker on all of the issues and not just vote straight party line, but actually vote with your interests in mind, then I hope you will vote for me in November. And thank you for letting me be here and talk to you today.
All right, thank you. That concludes our discussion this evening. Let me, on behalf of Foley Institute, thank all of you for coming out tonight, for your excellent questions. Let me thank our two candidates for a wonderful discussion. And join me now in thanking our candidates.
My wallet.